And welcome back, and we're moving directly into our second conversation for today as we discuss the role of the United Nations around the world and in Belize as they celebrate United Nations Day. We have with us two UN representatives. We have Tisa Grant, who is the Liaison Officer for the United Nations Population Fund, known as UNFPA. And we have Dr. Susan Kasedde, who is the representative for UNICEF Belize. Good morning, ladies, and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Now, I think it's obviously today, or when you celebrate United Nations Day, it is an opportunity to remind people about the importance of the establishment of the United Nations. So let's take a moment to step back and talk about why it was historic to have countries across the world come together in formation of the UN.
Good morning, Malini, and thank you again for having us this morning on UN Day. The 24th of October is celebrated as UN Day to commemorate the ratification, the entry into force of the UN Charter in 1945. The UN Charter is the document that sets out what the purpose of the United Nations is. The United Nations Charter has been ratified by 193 nations globally, and it sets out four main aims or purposes of the UN. First, to make sure that we work together to maintain peace and security. Second, that we establish a friendly relationship between nations based on a respect for equal rights and self-determination. The third is to foster international collaboration towards the resolution of challenges of a social, economic, and humanitarian nature, based once again on a respect for human rights. And then fourth and finally, it's to ensure that we continue to foster partnership towards the achievement of these ideals. So that's what we're celebrating today. All of our agencies, UNICEF, the agency that I lead itself, is mandated by the 193 nations that have ratified this charter to make sure that we lead the global efforts to promote and protect the rights of every child, to ensure that the rights of every child are fulfilled and that every child has the opportunity to thrive and meet their full potential.
Yeah. Now, 72 years later, I think the concept of the UN and a general understanding is one that is widely accepted. But the recognition of people now as global citizens, as members of a part of this world, is really becoming, I think, more realistic for people. Now, it also brings into question, and I think people now become more dependent on the role of regional bodies and international bodies like the United Nations. When you consider how an organization like the UN grows with the rest of the world and ensures that the needs of all and the concerns of all are met, and that the challenges maybe change, don't change, or progress that is made, what would be your analysis as to the growth curve of the UN over 72 years?
Wow, Marlene.
I know it's a big question.
When you think about the global population, for example, it took about, well, I don't even know how long, but it took hundreds of thousands of years for the world to reach that 1 billion mark in its population. And then after that, in 200 years, it reached 7 billion, right, in 2011. And so with that, there came a lot of needs, a lot of sustainability issues that we had to look at, and so the UN had to grow with that. This is why all the countries came together in 1945 and agreed upon the UN Charter on saying that, okay, these are the things that we need to achieve as a world because we're seeing the growing population, and we all have different mandate. Now, Dr. Kasedde explained that UNICEF has the mandate for ensuring that every child achieves their full potential. Well, for UNFPA, we basically want to ensure that every young person's potential is fulfilled. In fact, our entire mandate is to deliver a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled, in a nutshell. And so with the different UN agencies, and there are so many, I don't even know them all myself to be able to list them off. But the world issues are so great. And we then have the Sustainable Development Goals that look at these 17 overarching topics that really have many different subtopics underneath, because we cannot possibly compile all the issues that we have into 17 goals. And so the UN agencies together would lead the world in achieving these 17 goals.
And I mean, it started from the turn of the millennium with the Millennium Development Goals, and 15 years later, we now move into the Sustainable Development Goals. So you have markers as to where the most progress has been made. Where would you say, as the global community, that we have made the most progress?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think that you get a different answer depending on who you're speaking to. In 1945, when the UN Charter went into force, it was signed by just about 50 countries at the time. Today we have 193 countries being member states of the United Nations. And committing to make sure that they work to meet the ideals of equality of human rights and continuous progress towards fulfillment of those ideals. Belize joined the United Nations in 1981. Today, in 2017, if you look at the progress that has been made for children alone in Belize, I think that there's a lot that should be praised and lauded. There are still significant challenges, and that's where the issue about monitoring and looking at our data comes in. The Sustainable Development Goals that have been coined identify a number of areas, including education. 96% of children are enrolled in primary school in Belize, but 60% are enrolled at the secondary school level. We need to get that number back up, because every child, to fulfill their full potential, needs to have the best quality education available for the best chance. In Belize, the majority of children under the age of 5 have active interaction with an adult on a day-to-day basis that puts them on the path for success, for learning. But our opportunities for engagement, mentorship, support to adolescents changes, it falls. We see that 65% of children across Belize experience violent and harsh discipline, particularly the youngest, but including our teenagers. We have to find ways to address the issues that remain challenges and threats to the fulfillment of potential for every one of our children. So we have data to point us to where we should act. The mixed data that was released in May of this year by UNICEF and the Statistics Institute of Belize identifies critical areas, including access to services for adolescents, including sexual and reproductive health services, to address the high level of teenage pregnancy, violence, prevention of violence, harsh discipline, and continuity in education. These are the areas that we are concerned about, and the continuous exposure to multidimensional poverty in far too many children. These are the areas that we want to make sure we don't lose sight of, even as we celebrate the progress made.
And from the UNFPA?
It's the same. The trend shows that when you're a child, well, this is with respect to reproductive health, sexual and reproductive health. We find that children have access to health care through their parents, through maternal and child care programs. But as soon as one reaches that adolescent age, they no longer have the free access. They won't necessarily be taken to the clinics by their parents. So we have a gap. We also have where our young persons are able to consent to sexual activity at the age of 16, but not able to access health services as freely as they would like to, or they're not socialized to develop that health-seeking behavior. And so we've seen over the years a decrease in our adolescent pregnancy rates among our young persons, but even though there has been a decrease, what the last mix is showing is that there is an increase. We're looking at 74 in every 1,000 adolescent population. The last mix in 2011 was showing 64. So there is a slight increase. But given, when you think about it, from many years before, there has been a sort of decrease, except that the absolute numbers seem to remain the same. It's around an average of a 1,500 live births per. And we still don't really know what the real rate of adolescent pregnancy is, because we're simply using the live births as a proxy for that rate. So That's one of the issues. We have the other issues of investments in our young persons. Our young persons have the highest unemployment rate, somewhere around 20-something% or 19%, I think, more recently, 19%. So that's the highest unemployment rate when you consider the general unemployment rate of the country, which I'm not too sure where it is right now. I think it was 10%, somewhere between 10 and 11. But the unemployment rate for young persons is highest.
Now, I think what you have spoken about are realities that without numbers, people see as a part of their everyday reality. We all know a teenager, or a teen mom, somebody who started off their parenting from very young. We know the situation of some children, even within our own communities. Now, I think one of the things that oftentimes people don't understand is how the UN works in a country. And you have persons who perhaps, because they don't have that understanding, will speak about bringing in a foreign agenda. But let's talk a bit about that. The United Nations, Belize as a signatory to the United Nations, a member of the United Nations, we work with these specific organizations, UNFPA, UNICEF, UNDP, UNHCR, PAHO, and WHO, but you work in conjunction with the country, right? Explain that for us.
I think that that it's important to understand that when UNICEF or any UN agency works in a country, it works in the service of the goals that are defined through the collective consultation that has taken place in the country.
Yes.
And that's certainly the case for UNICEF. UNICEF signs a cooperation agreement with the government of Belize, and that cooperation agreement is directly aligned to the National Development Framework that has been endorsed by the country. And that National Development Framework is not the property of a particular institution, it is the property of the people. It reflects the vision of the people of Belize. And it identifies the challenges, it identifies disparities, and our role as the UN system is really to make sure that we remain focused on the priorities within that National Development Framework, that we work towards gradual realization of the goals within that. And the great thing about the Growth and Sustainable Development Strategy is that it's very closely aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the only way that we can achieve this, as repeated throughout the SDGs, is that we have to partner broadly. We have to partner not just with government institutions, we have to partner with civil society, we have to partner with communities, we have to partner with the media, we have to partner with children, with youth, and with the private sector, because it's through this broad and innovative partnership that we're going to find new and more effective ways to move quickly towards the achievement of the goals within the GSDS and the goals, therefore, that UNICEF and the other UN agencies are working towards that contribute to achievement of the SDGs. So that's how we operate.
Yeah.
One of the actions that we do as One UN is to sign the country implementation plan, which is formulated together as a UN system in Belize, and is also signed off by the government of Belize. And basically the country implementation plan, or the SIP as it is called, is the operationalization of the MSDF, the Multi-Country Sustainable Development Framework. Right? So that's one of the actions that we take. And it goes back to what Dr. Kasedde was saying, that we need to partner with different stakeholders. And this is where that is articulated in the country implementation plan. For us as an agency, we always try to support where population and development is concerned. Because it's one of the conversations that are not had very often, looking at how population trends and population issues affect development in a country. And of course we zero in on that and look at the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. But in general, we do understand that a country has to know the sex, the number of persons, the ethnicity, the education level of a country to be able to make decisions that will affect policy. And so one of these things, one of these important exercises, in addition to the mix, is the censuses. And so that's one of the areas where UNFPA is providing technical support to the Statistical Institute of Belize. Recently there was a stakeholder consultation a few months ago, where we basically invited all persons to come and hear from the SIB on what they're going to be doing for the 2020 census, because it seems far away, but it's not. One of the more recent support provided was to have a training session on the data analysis, because we have all this wonderful data from the mix, from other surveys that are done in the country, even from censuses, and we don't have our national counterparts doing data analysis to inform programs and activities and policies. And so we've recently had that activity. So that's one area in which support is being given. And it's not just one UN agency that gives support to statistics and data, because UNICEF does through MIX. The other agencies are supporting in the development of the national statistical system. And so we also lend support to the government in their formulation of their M&E framework for the GSDS, which was mentioned just a while ago.
Now let's talk about the UN system in Belize. Which entities are represented, and how is it defined as to whether or not there is a need for a UNICEF or a UNFPA in any particular country? So let's start with the UN system in Belize. Who do we have represented?
So in Belize, we're fortunate to have the presence of UNICEF, UNFPA, obviously. We also have, you mentioned PAHO, we've got UNDP, we have a representative for IOM, and we've got UNOPS, UN Operations, and UNHCR, sorry. But we also benefit from non-resident agencies that are continually working with partners based in Belize, and so we are leveraging the support continually from UNESCO, from ILO, UN Women. And so I think it's important to recognize that what we're able to do and the support that we as a nation in Belize are able to leverage in terms of technical, financial, intellectual support from the United Nations agencies is not limited to the presence in the country. And that's a huge advantage for Belize as a member of the United Nations system.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was, I think, one of the things that we don't look at so often, even just the technical expertise that you're able to tap into, some of the skill sets beyond those that are in country, and even learning from the experiences in other countries is a very important part of the work of the United Nations. On a day like today, as persons who are working within the system itself, what does it mean for you? What do you celebrate on a day like today?
Well, she let me go first.
Yes.
Well, for us, I think as individuals, we celebrate being a part of the UN family. And of course, when you think about it in the broader scope, we celebrate the existence of the UN system globally. We celebrate the signing of that UN charter, because it means that the life has changed for so many people since the realization of the UN system. So that's what we celebrate, really. We celebrate what has been done. We celebrate what promises to be done, and this is what we celebrate. I don't know what else to say. I think, it's a happy day for us.
I mean, I think we celebrate as much as staff working within the United Nations system, as well as citizens of nations that are member states of the United Nations system. I think that the 4 ideals that I mentioned at the beginning, reflected in the UN Charter, are ideals that every single one of us can appreciate. The importance of making sure that we can live and grow, and our children can live and grow in an environment of peace and security. That we have positive, friendly relations with the nations around one another. Nevermore has that been as important as it is today, when our borders are so porous and you see so much movement of families, children, men and women, back and forth between borders. We need to have these friendly relations across borders to make sure that rights are not curtailed simply because one has moved. The third, which is really about making sure that there is collaboration in solving the problems of a social, economic and humanitarian nature, that is critical now. We've seen the hurricane and the devastating effects of the hurricanes in the Eastern Caribbean. Nevermore has it been as important for us to be able to learn from the experiences that we have, to make sure that we're prepared, to make sure that we're able to effectively protect and preserve the lives and dignity of brothers and sisters faced by any of these challenges, but also that we draw on the lessons in accelerating our progress towards development and the goals we've put in place. So I celebrate the partnership, I celebrate being a global citizen, I celebrate the opportunity to continue to work, and I mostly celebrate the privilege as a UN staff member of being able to serve in advocating for and supporting this government and the people of Belize in the pursuit of the goals of the United Nations Charter.
Yeah. You know, I love when we speak about being global citizens, because I think one of the things oftentimes in a small developing country like Belize, we feel that we must always be on the receiving end of aid and care and expertise. But even within the system, we are offering our expertise and our experiences, as is the case right now in the Caribbean. In fact, there are UN members deployed in relief efforts. Can we talk a bit about that? I know you have your child protection officer out.
We actually have 3 staff. I'm very proud to say we have 3 staff from UNICEF that have been deployed to support the relief efforts in the Eastern Caribbean. Stacia Shepard, who's one of our program assistants, just returned yesterday. Denise Roberto, who is our early childhood development specialist and education lead, is leading UNICEF's work in the relief efforts in Anguilla, and Melissa Rivera, our admin assistant, who is supporting all the coordination of the travel of persons in and out of Barbados to support the relief efforts in the Eastern Caribbean. There is no mistake that we have a lot to offer. And these are just 3 of the people that have gone just from Belize alone. And I think that it's that international collaboration, the capacity to leverage quickly the intellectual support, the technical support, the information and the resources to solve problems that are common between us is what we really can offer when we as a United Nations partnership are at our best.
I think we've also have 1 person from UNDP deployed as well. We don't have any from UNFPA Belize. We're too small for that. But we do have persons from UNFPA in our sub-regional office in Jamaica that have been deployed to Barbados as well.
Yes. So there are, you know, and I wanted to bring up that point because I think, as I mentioned before, because of our position, we often feel that we must always receive, but what we've been able to do is also develop our own people to be able to offer expertise beyond our borders as well, and willingly so. So I think it's a great example of how being a part of the United Nations has expanded our roles as Belizeans, but Caribbean brothers and sisters, Americans from this hemisphere, and then beyond that as well. So how are you having your public celebration for UN Day? There's an information fair that is scheduled?
That is scheduled for November.
Okay.
It's an SDG fair.
Okay.
We wanted to do it this month, but there's a lot of things going on this month. So I understand that it's being scheduled. I'm not a part of the planning committee.
Okay.
So this is only hearsay. But it's planned for sometime in November.
Yeah.
So today we're celebrating as UN system more privately.
Okay.
You know, basically reaffirming the commitments that we've made to being a part of the UN. And we're participating in a regional meeting, town hall meeting, where we get to hear from our different resident coordinators and leaders from across the region, and having our own meeting among the UN system here in Belize. So we have a day filled with activities. It's very serious, but it's also very fun at the end part of it.
Oh. Yes. Well, I hope that you enjoy. Anything else you would like to say as we close?
You know, I think that just 2 things. First, one of the other things that we're doing throughout the week is we're collaborating with the media to make sure we continue to share information about what UN Day means and what being a part of the UN means. And so there will be a number of editorials that come out from different agencies of the UN. But I think as we leave, I really just want to say again what a privilege it is for a nation like Belize, as a member state of the United Nations, to be part of this global community. And the challenges that have been pointed to through the data that we have are challenges that are eminently solvable, because we've got the partnerships in place, we've got the creative resources in the people of Belize in place to be able to tell us just what is needed and how they, in their, based on their insight, feel that we can solve these problems. And so it's really fostering that partnership and ensuring that there is constant communication, use of data that will help us get to the solution of the problems that we face. And we're very, very positive and hopeful about that.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in, and happy UN Day to you, and of course to the rest of us as global citizens. We appreciate you stopping in. I think oftentimes we talk about the individual work that is taking place in partnership with an agency, but to understand the broader picture as to why we have the particular organizations and what your aims are, it's a good opportunity. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by representatives of the United States Embassy and one of their featured speakers talking about what they're hoping to deliver to the young people of Belize. That's coming up after the break. Stay tuned.